Today on the ONS podcast, we have my good friend Morgan Alley. This is a wide-ranging conversation from everything from music to psilocybin to religion to introspection and just being kind to yourself. I hope you enjoy this episode of the ONS podcast. So how you doing, man?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It's been a while since you've been on the podcast.
Yeah.
What's been new?
Everything. Yeah, everything. It's been good and bad and everything in between. Business is good.
Yeah, 1836.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have been doing some pretty amazing stuff.
Thank you.
What's been some of the more like the projects you've been more proud of as of recently?
We've gotten into the weird world of NDAs.
So you can't talk
with
about
projects that we can't talk about.
You're in the big boy club.
that are pretty exciting. But yeah, I can't talk about those. What other projects have we done recently? We just finished a project or just released a project for IMG Academy. It was kind of a legacy piece on Nick Bollettieri.
Okay.
Who founded Bollettieri Tennis Academy, and which turned into IMG Academy.
Right.
And he's 91 now, but he's just had like a hell of a career. I mean, he's coached Andre Agassi and Maria Sharapova, Boris Becker, like all these, just insane 10 number ones, like just crazy. So it was really cool to tell his story.
Yeah.
And,
I watched the movie King Richard. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yep.
And they talk about it. They talk about Nick Bollettieri and IMG, or I don't know if it was called IMG at that point, but they do mention it. And
yeah.
like, do you really want to go to Bradenton, Florida, and work with him, or can you come down here and work with us? Like, so it was funny. Like, obviously, there was a massive reputation in that era of like, ooh, you get to work with Nick Bollettieri. Like,
yeah, Florida was like this weird hub.
For tennis.
Yeah. Like just in general, like West Palm and Bradenton and Fort Lauderdale. It was just like this strange, I guess the weather,
it's gotta be
year round.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was fun. I don't know much about tennis, or I didn't. Felt like I learned a lot.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
And so obviously 1836 has grown quite a bit.
It's amazing.
What have been some of the biggest lessons you've learned since the last time you've been on? Because you guys were just kind of getting your feet wet with 1836 the last time we spoke. Obviously, we speak all the time. We're very good friends, but it's a big endeavor to start a company, and then you're starting it with a co-founder, and then you're working in this extremely stressful environment of film. It's this combination of business, but you also have this massive art influence into it. So since the last time we've talked, what are some of the things, like hurdles that you thought you didn't really expect to jump over? What are some of the lessons that you've learned? What are the things that are like, oh, I didn't realize this aspect of this whole thing was going to be as difficult as it was?
That's a good question. A lot. There's been a lot. I think one of the big, and I'm like through and through a creative. Like I don't know how I've gotten into the world of running my own business. A lot of times I feel like a fish out of water. And thank God for Dev, because I think we balance each other out really well. But leaning creative so heavily, I think it's always a shock, and I have a history in music as well,
right?
But it's always kind of a shock when you kind of get past the novelty stage of running the business, and you start getting into bigger budgets and bigger clients, and there's more pressure and some more organization. You have more people on your team, and you end up realizing that the thing that you actually want to do, which is create the product, is about 3% of the actual business, and a lot of it is spreadsheets and budgets and emails and things that you just kind of didn't see coming, you know, like it's just, there's a lot that goes into it on the back end and on the front end, that we're kind of having to learn on the fly.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how do you manage this stuff? Like, how do you deal with this stuff? And the film world's really weird in that way, in the sense that like there's not really a clear path to moving forward. You know, there's a lot of content on YouTube about getting started and like these sort of videography series, you know, YouTubers.
Sure.
And
yeah,
then,
like Daniel Fisher.
yeah, Peter
Or
McKinnon.
Schiffer, right?
Yep,
Daniel Schiffer.
Daniel Schiffer.
Peter McKinnon.
Yeah.
Yeah, those guys.
Those guys, which have been really helpful up to a point, and then you kind of get to this point to where like you start to
You don't want to do real estate videos.
Yeah, you kind of take a step into the industry.
Right.
Like you're starting to put one foot in there, and you're kind of like, okay, well, I don't know how this works, and you can't really find any information on it. So you're just kind of, you know, you're moving forward blindly almost,
Right.
you know, and just in faith that, and I think that's really similar to what you're doing as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
Just jump head first in and see what happens, kind
Yeah.
of thing. Figure it out on the fly. I think that's a lot of businesses, man. Every business is unique to the personalities that run it, the product that they're producing, the customer base,
yeah,
and the people that they're trying to essentially create a culture with. There's no handbook. I mean, there's fundamentals that you can learn, sure,
Yeah.
but at a certain point, the fundamentals serve only as the base,
Yeah.
and then you have to keep innovating and creating and working on the fly to serve your business in its unique space, right? And I'm sure you guys have had to. I mean, I've learned. I mean, especially through COVID, obviously, like being a filmmaker during COVID. I mean, that had to be quite a challenge. That there was no. I know for me, at least, being in a clothing space during COVID was quite difficult.
Yeah.
How was that unique for you guys?
Actually, it was unique in the fact we started the business at the beginning of COVID, like, which is hilarious to think back on.
Right.
But it was unique for us in the sense that like we knew that this is what we wanted to do, and we just kind of decided like we're just not going to let anything stop us. Like we're just going to push through this and see what happens, you know. And surprisingly enough, we stayed really busy, and I think our location really helped, being in Florida.
Yeah.
You know, like we were obviously trying to be as careful as possible, not really, especially in the early stages, not knowing what it was or wasn't and trying to figure it all out. But we knew that we were kind of in this space of like, well, like we've got to make it through this. Like we have to, like, there's just, you know,
There's not another option.
There's no other option,
Yeah.
you know, that's just what we have to do. So, we did really, I mean, it was bizarre looking back, you know, to think about like the state of the country and the state of the world and how we were able to survive that and stay busy.
Yeah.
It was just, something that we were really thankful for.
Yeah. I think a lot of companies kind of leaned into content because they weren't able to do much else other than that. So I think that was a huge advantage in your side.
Yeah.
What you mentioned earlier that you were a musician. I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit. You were with a touring sign band, Colors.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that kind of prepared you for being within the film industry?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Big time. They kind of feel synonymous a little bit. There's,
In what way?
I think just in the format, you know, like I think ultimately with both music and film, you know, for me anyway, the goal is to create something that the audience feels, you know, like it's less about like, it's less understood and more felt.
Okay.
That's the goal, right? It's like, and I think music and film are two of the greatest platforms for that. I mean, they can fundamentally change culture. They can shift culture like completely on their own. You know, an artist can come through and, I mean, look at like a Kanye West or whatever, you know,
Right.
You have these guys that just come through and change culture as we know it. And I think film does the same thing, you know, when like a film hits, like it'll change the year, you know, like it'll change the direction of taste and style and just culture in general. And it can open your mind to a lot of things. Like it allows you to see the world through a new lens. And I've always loved that about art in general. And I've always been a really visual person. So when I made music, like I was always making music to something I was watching. Like I always had like this, like a television or an image in my head, or it's always kind of been like that for me. So when we started making our music videos, I had a really heavy hand in the direction, and I didn't really know what I was doing at the time.
Sure.
I just knew, like, I was really fascinated with it, and I was always looking behind the camera, like seeing what they were doing, trying to understand it whenever I wasn't in the scene. And I think that was a huge catalyst for me. Once I got out of music, you know, I needed something else that was creative to sort of scratch that itch.
Right.
And
what brought you out of music? Just out of curiosity.
Music was, there was a lot of tension with music for me. I started playing drums when I was 9, and I knew what I wanted to do with my life when I was 9. Like, it was kind of a weird thing.
Already?
Like, I knew that I was going to play music. Like, that was it, you know, and I played drums 8-10 hours a day for years, you know, and kind of just moved through local bands and into some touring acts, and, you know, ended up having the career that I did. But at the same time, I learned a lot of really hard lessons through that. And I've always been a pretty driven person. And so, and to a fault sometimes.
Yeah.
To where I'll kind of, I'm pretty hard-headed. Like, I'll keep pushing when doors are clearly closing, you know, and I'm trying to be better at that. But that was something that I really learned with music was, you know, I had all of these external goals. For my success was calculated by these external goals. It's like, okay, well, I need to make a record that's #1 on alt radio, and we need to play the late night show, and we need to do this, and we want to sell out a tour with, you know, these club venues, whatever. And there was all these motivations that were just very surface level motivations. It was a lot driven heavily by vanity and ego and things that I hadn't really wrapped my head around yet, because I was, you know, 23, you know, like just kind of moving forward, trying to figure it out. And I remember so specifically, I remember the moment that I realized that I had been climbing the wrong mountain, like, so clearly. I remember I was in Portland, Oregon, and after the shows, we would always have meet and greets, you know, and we'd go by the merch table and take photos and do the whole thing. And those were always like dreams of mine, you know, like it was always, you had like the sold out show, and then you'd go back and you know, it's like the whole rock star life or whatever. And I remember it was the biggest tour that we had to date. It was like a 50-day tour. It was completely sold out, 1,000 capacity venues, like all over the country. And it was like one of those things where like the boxes were being checked, and it's like the fans are screaming your song back to you, and it's just like this really surreal moment. And I
kind of everything you envisioned when you were 9 years old.
Exactly. Yeah. This like romantic idea of what it would all be. Yeah. And I remember finishing the show, and I, at this point, was already pretty like heavily addicted to like drugs and alcohol. You know, I was just kind of numbing everything. And I knew that I was in a really dark place, but I didn't yet have the tools to know what to do with it. So naturally, you know, those worked, you know, it was like the best medicine for the time. And I just remember like doing that meet and greet and like just leaving in the middle of it. Like I was so hollow, like just a shell of myself, you know, like I had realized that I had gotten to the place that I had always dreamed of, and I was completely empty. Yeah. And that was huge. And I spent the next 3 years of my life trying to restructure I kind of figured out that I needed to restructure my entire belief system. Like I had this identity crisis through it all, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, honestly, you know, and I will always like look at those moments fondly, like the good and the bad. I mean, it was just a huge like growing phase for me.
I think I can't remember, there's a name for that when that happens. Because a lot of us, I'm a musician myself. Like I've very much remember like my early 20s, just like that was my ideal, like be on tour, be traveling all over the country, playing sold out shows. Like I think every musician goes through that like dream. But then I had, you know, guys like you and a couple other friends that like I kind of had a window into that world. And I saw like, you know, I was a dad very young. I got married at 22. So I was already starting to establish a family, and some of these guys already had families, and I just saw like how much time they were spending away from their kids and their wife. And, you know, yeah, it's cool to play like a 2-hour show for a sold out crowd, but then what do you do for the other 22 hours of the day?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it was very much like, you know what, I don't think this is the life that I want.
Yeah.
But there is a word for that. Like when you've strived so long for this, like this goal, and like once you attain it, you're like, oh, this is it. Like there's something to that. Yeah. And, I'm sure it's devastating because like you realize like all of a sudden, like I've worked my ass off since I was 9 years old to reach this point. And now all of a sudden it's like, it's all empty. This is not what I want.
Yeah.
What do you think, like, where do you think the emptiness came from? Because obviously this was a dream of yours for so long. Like, give us some context into that.
I think that's going to be tough to distill, but when I found music, I listened to bands like Under Oath and Thrice and Brand New, and then I had this other side. It was like this, like a lot of hip hop, you know, like late '90s, early 2000s hip hop, and I kind of had these groups of genres that I really connected with, and I kind of found myself like attaching to those artists because I think there was like a sense of honesty, you know, in their writing, you know, and just the tone of it all. And like there was something about the taste and tone and the way that the tracks were produced and things that I didn't really understand quite at the time. But I felt it, you know, and it, I think it like a lot of people, it saved me. Like it got me out of some really dark places as a, you know, young kid, you know, in my teens, trying to like, you know, you're all fucking confused when, you know, like when you're that young. But I remember it resonating with me so deeply. And I remember going to my first show at the House of Blues in Orlando, and it was Thrice and Brand New. And I just remember like,
that's a great venue. I love that place. Yeah.
And it was before I understood, you know, like I think the more you understand an industry, the less magic there is. So you understand
with anything,
how like the lights are set up. You understand how DMXs run. You understand all the smoke and mirrors that go behind it. And you're kind of like, yeah, I get it. But at that time, like it was just this big magic show, you know, and I was like kind of taken by it. And I think somewhere along the way, as I grew up and started to form ideas and try to figure myself out, you know, you kind of get lost in your own shit, you know, like you just get lost in your own vanity and you get lost in your own ego. And I kind of lost that original, like that reason, the reason I decided to play music in the first place. It was kind of, it disappeared. And I had all these other drivers for it, you know, women and attention and validation, you know.
So you kind of lost the love of the game.
Yeah. It was just kind of, I forgot, you know, I forgot why I started in the first place. And I think that's kind of where I ended up, you know, finding myself so empty, was just like music and film, kind of going back to what I said, like they're so profound. There's something mystic about them. Like you're capturing an image through a lens, or you're capturing vibrations through strings and wood, and there's something really mystical about that process.
Sure.
And then having it resonate with other people and spreading that, and having other people receive work that I've done just like I received the work that those early bands kind of gave me. That's profound.
Sure.
You know, and I think that's the thing that I was really missing.
So what'd you do? You have this identity crisis. You realize like, this isn't what I want to do.
Yeah.
What was your plan B at that point? What'd you retreat to?
I held on to drugs for a while. Drugs were really helpful for the time.
Yeah.
Really devastating in the long run, but you know, that was kind of, I had a lot of I think a lot of creatives kind of have these, they tend to be self-destructive in those ways, you know, like you hear about it over and over again. And thankfully, honestly, it's just due to the moral and ethical base that my parents had given me, and the structure of friendships that I've developed, and people like you that were able to see my life and my self-destructions for what they were, and were brave enough to hold me accountable to those things, and in a loving way, and say like, hey, like I care about you, so clean your shit up, you know, like
in a non-judgmental way.
Yeah.
Like we're just, we love you.
Yeah.
And we know all this potential is just in there.
Yeah. And I think that was huge for me.
Yeah.
At the same time, like I had also found, like we were still playing music and we were still touring, you know.
So you didn't quit the band at that point?
Not yet.
Okay.
We'd still had, we were still moving forward, and you know, you're driving a lot. Like it's just a lot of nothing, you know, like that's a lot of your life.
Yeah.
And that's when I'd found Rogan, which subsequently like found Jordan Peterson and all these other people that have kind of hit the stratosphere at this point. But honestly have like, they started to instill like these ideas in my head of like, oh, okay, like I can take responsibility for my life. I don't have to be a victim of my own depression or my own misery, you know, like there are ways to own your shit, you know, deal with your trauma, deal with your pain, you know, face those things and come out a better version of yourself, you know, and that was huge for me. Like that changed everything. And I knew at that point that that I no longer had a place in music professionally. And so I had to leave, and that was really hard.
I bet.
You know, it was like divorcing, you know, divorcing a wife. It's like, it's a brutal process. You know, you spend every waking moment, you know, in a very small contained bus or van with, you know, these few people, and you grow really close.
Sure.
And, really do have that sort of marital relationship, it feels like, you know.
And for people who aren't musicians, like when you play music with somebody else, it's a very bonding experience.
Yeah.
You know, there's you're syncing up everything musically, right? And so you have to play cohesively. So it's a very just extremely bonding experience. The people I play music with will be my friends for the rest of my life. Like it's just what it is.
Yeah.
That moment had to be terrifying, because it's like, what the fuck do I do next?
Yeah.
Like you are a drummer. Like your entire identity at that point was wrapped up in music. What do you do with that? Like,
well, I think there was a weird sense of peace and acceptance at that point in my life. So without going too deep down the rabbit trail and trying to make this as digestible as possible, in that whole mess of things, my mother had passed, from cancer. And it was like this really weird situation where she was in hospice. She passed. Like the next day we left for that tour. That was like the biggest tour we had done. Like we had to leave the next day. I had to fly home for the funeral. I had to go back out. It was just like this sort of mess of things that happened. And so I think I finally just came to this, like my whole life kind of came to a head. It was like, all right, like you found the bottom. Congratulations. Like you're either not gonna make it, or you have to make some really, really drastic decisions and really drastic changes in your life to get out of this. And one of the big turning points and something that really helped me face a lot of this stuff and start to deal with it and take responsibility for my life was psilocybin. Shortly after my mother had passed, I had taken a high dose of psilocybin, understanding, like, you know, hearing from a few people, like the benefits of dealing with trauma and depression, anxiety, and all the things that were kind of going on at the time. And I was like, well, I don't have much to lose. You know, I'd taken psilocybin in the past, but just as kind of like just a party drug, you know?
Right.
I think there's a lot of, I think with psychedelics, it's really interesting because a lot of it revolves around your intention, you know, going into it. Like you can easily suppress and you can easily use it as a distraction and an avoidance. Just like I think you can with anything. Like you can abuse any substance, you know? So I kind of went into it with this, with this new perspective, and it was life-changing. I was able to deal with a lot of things in that experience. And since then, it's been something that I've practiced semi-regularly, once every couple of years or so, to help. You know, I find myself kind of slipping back into some of these patterns, and you have these sort of neural pathways that start to form, and your life becomes, you know,
whenever trauma happens, you kind of revert back to the neural pathway of this is how I deal with it.
Yeah.
So I know you most recently had the psilocybin experience, and that was one of the main things I wanted to talk to you about today, because I've just been absolutely fascinated by this whole thing. Started watching the How to Change Your Mind documentary on Netflix. Been listening to Tim Ferriss for years talk about psilocybin, and he's much more on, like, I mean, he's funding like millions of dollars into research to help with like PTSD, trauma, all those things, and it's like there's something there if we can just get out of the tabooness. Is that a word? Tabooness of it. You know, it's like this is a very like healing thing for a lot of people, and I've known that for you it's been healing. Take me through. You traveled somewhere. You did a hero's dose of psilocybin, correct?
Yeah, what's called penis envy is it's one of the more potent like strains of psilocybin. So yeah, it's a journey.
I know you've been dealing a lot with stuff in your personal life, just like you said, like another trauma. So reverting back to those neural pathways. What is it about this psilocybin experience that helps you kind of come out of it? Because it doesn't sound fun. It sounds like when you got back and you told me the experience, I'm like, that sounds like the best and worst thing that I've ever heard. Walk me through it.
Man, okay.
I know a lot of this is hard to put into words.
It is. Yeah. This is always the frustrating part,
right?
About kind of coming back from these experiences and trying to distill it into something that's like bite-sized and that can make sense in this like homeostatic state,
right?
Because it's a really felt experience, and I think personally that the people that I've spoken with, the people that I've talked to who have a history of not fundamental Christianity, but have an understanding of like the structure of Christianity and maybe lived in that world in the past, grown up in a family, Christian household, whatever, which I did. And I sort of deconstructed that and have sort of found my own way through that. I find that there's something deeply connected to that world of Christianity. And I don't know. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of, speculation about psychedelics and biblical stories.
100%. Yeah, like the more I hear my friends discuss, their experiences with any sort of psychedelic, it may not necessarily only be psilocybin, but because you and I have a very similar background as far as like growing up in a Christian household. My dad made sure I went to Sunday school, Sunday church, Sunday night church, Wednesday church, all the church, like 6 times in a week, in a very like fundamental and damaging background when it comes to religion. And but you look at it and you're just like, you're told that these biblical stories are historically accurate, right? Yeah. I mean, I have a friend of mine that just went to the Ark experience, like they like replicated the entire Ark, which she started posting pictures of like some of the stuff that's in there, and it's just like it gets really like you're minimizing or you're simplifying a very complex story when you take a story like the Ark, and there's so many like beautiful narratives within that Ark story that are very, very good, like life lessons that still contribute to our life today. Yeah. And you narrow it down to this simplistic version of that story because you want it to fit within your reality and your paradigm. And when you look at these stories as simply a historical story or a science story, it takes all of the beauty out of the story. Yeah. But the more I hear about psychedelic experiences from close friends that have had them, I'm like, there's no fucking way that these biblical stories weren't written out of some sort of psychedelic or DMT or whatever experience. Yeah. And now they're finally starting to come out with like, we're finding like DMT and the incense and Kyle, I don't know if you could look this up, but there was something about like the Dead Sea Scrolls or something that didn't they find like in one of the it was somewhere like in these ancient scrolls of biblical texts that they found like traces of DMT. Yeah. So I think it's something that we can pretty confidently say that has been used throughout humanity, whether it be for healing processes or not. Did you find anything? Kinda? A little bit? Let me know. Interrupt me. But there's been plenty of time that we've known that this has shown up in history as a pretty like spiritual experience. Yeah. Now obviously like it's become illegal and there's been some just like red tape around it, but I think we're missing out on tapping into something really amazing when we can have the opportunity, if we can just get rid of the stigma of I think that. So too. So talk me through, like, I mean, anything that you can articulate from your experiences.
I took a large dose, took 6 grams in the middle of the woods by this river. It was this really beautiful area and kind of set up like a little camping spot and brought some fruit and just kind of had, wanted to create the right setting, and I think that's really important. I took them like 10:30 a.m. It was like a daytime thing, which was kind of new for me. Usually I'd taken them at night, and it's a wildly different experience at night.
Is it darker?
It's much darker. Yes. both literally and spiritually
in that realm.
Yeah. But I'm still trying to figure it all out. This was about 3 weeks ago. So I'm still there's these weird resonance, like lingering resonance, like they kind of sit with me still. And I think there's still a little bit of ambiguity in it all. And so I've been doing a lot of writing, just trying to figure out like, what was that overwhelming experience trying to tell me? And I've kind of distilled it down to a couple of messages, and the first one was just like this really beautiful mourning process.
Okay.
So like you said, I won't go into it because it's just a lot, but I've had a considerable amount of trauma over the last year. It's taken place. It's kind of it's another one of those chapter markers in your life. It's
Sure.
like, this is going to change me
Yeah.
forever. And there was a clear before psilocybin and after that's kind of taken place, and it was really profound. And the best way that I can sort of describe it is, before, you know, there was 2 or 3 months before I had taken the psilocybin where I had started to just completely slip, like, down this path of nihilism again.
Yeah.
You know, and I was fighting it as much as I could, but it was just I couldn't hold myself together. And I just remember, like, every day just praying, like not even praying, just angry at God. Like, how could you do this to me? Like, how could you like completely abandon me? Like, it was just like hopelessness, you know?
I remember you calling me saying, like, I feel like Job right now.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
This is
It
crazy.
was just complete black, you know, like, just, yeah. And I hadn't felt that in a long time because, you know, like, and it's funny. You have these entitlements of like, okay, well, I'm trying to figure my life out. I'm doing the right things, or I'm trying to do the right thing. Like, I'm pursuing, like, you know, being a better version of myself. And then all of a sudden tragedy happens and you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, I've been doing everything right. You know, why would you do this to me? And that was kind of the place I was in. And I remember I was sitting by this river, and across from the river were these huge, like, pine trees. And at the tops of the tree was like this representation of, like, the Godhead. And as I moved down the tree, the trunk of the tree, it started to thin out and it got really dark, and there was this sort of representation of hell. And at the bottom of it, there was a physical manifestation of Satan, and he was like this decrepit being that was sitting on this throne of skulls. And it was a really profound scene, you know, that it was painted in my head. And it was, it reminded me a lot of Carl Jung's quote about, I'm going to butcher it, but it's said that the tallest trees must have roots that reach down to hell, whatever it is.
It's something to the effect of, if you want to touch heaven, your roots have to touch hell, or something in that realm, which on face value, you're like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
Once you've lived a little bit of life, you've realized, like, there is something to, like, perspective.
Yeah.
And when you've touched hell, you realize, like, how good life can be. But it's only when you've reached down and, like, experienced true trauma and experienced true hell that you can appreciate when things are good, and when you feel like you've attained this heaven-like state.
I think it goes even a step beyond that, because I know a lot of people who have experienced trauma, but it's like there has to be some sort of conscious willingness to face it. You know, like being a victim of trauma is one thing, but, like, allowing going when that trauma happens, it's like you have two choices. It's like you can sit there and become a victim and allow it to just, you know, consume you, which there's a time and place for that. Like, there's times where you're there, and I was there for a minute, but I knew that there was going to come a time that I was like, okay, like, something has given me the strength to now face this. And it's like, usually it's when I hit the bottom, and I'm like, well, I have nothing to lose at this point. Right. So, and you just I remember when I was sitting at that river and I saw this representation of Satan, like I knew that I had to go over there and I had to go talk to him, and I had to love him. Like I had to learn to look him in the eye and accept him for what it was. And I knew that like I was looking at my own shit. It's like I'm looking at the monster that I could be, you know, like I'm looking at my potential for evil. And that whole representation was so beautiful because it was
and this was like very real to you. Like this, like it didn't feel like a dream. Like you physically felt like you were experiencing this.
It was more real than sitting at this table.
Jesus.
Right now.
That's crazy.
It's profound.
Yeah.
Like, and I just remember sitting there, and time kind of is irrelevant in that space. Like I don't know. It's weird.
It could be 1,000 years.
Yeah. You're just kind of moving. Like it's like this liquid thing that you're moving through. But I just remember it must've been hours that I just sat there and I wept. Like, I mean, it was overwhelming, like profound. And it was like, I was mourning, and I felt like for the first time in the last 3 months that like God profoundly showed himself. Like the presence of God was like so unbelievably real in that moment. And it was just like this really comforting voice just saying like, you're going to be okay. Like, I got you. And like the river was it was a river of tears, and it was like this river of God's tears, and he was mourning with me. And you know, I'm still trying to figure it all out,
Sure.
you know, and what all this means. But like, I think I spoke with a mutual friend of ours the other day, Ryan, your brother-in-law. And we had this whole discussion. I was thinking the other day about that moment, and I was understanding that like, for that moment to be as profound as it was, whether this is real or not, doesn't really matter. But for the story to make sense, and for this moment to make sense to me, I was like, I understand why Jesus died. I understand why, like, he had to go through all of these things. He had to go through like being beaten and whipped and betrayed by his father and betrayed by his friends and stripped naked and nailed to a cross. And like I said, I don't really know how to manage that story yet, because there's a lot of triggering like trauma from my past behind it.
Yeah.
But in that moment, like, I truly felt like God understood where I was at, and just saying like, I've been there, like, and you're going to be okay. And that was like a pivotal moment in my life, not just in like this season, like that changed my life. I had never felt anything like that. Even on my like previous journeys, like it was just something different. That like, even like now, like it, you know, I get emotional thinking about it, because, and that's like resonated with me since I've come out of it. Like there's this weird presence of God, and God is such a, you know, I'm using that word because I don't know of another word, divine, whatever. Yeah. Like I don't want to, there's a lot of baggage around, you know, words when we get into this world.
I know,
but
it sucks.
Yeah.
It's hard. Christianity has ruined Jesus, unfortunately, in this whole view. But I know kind of your a little bit more of your personal beliefs, and I know like you don't view God as like somewhere out there, you know, like you very much view God as like this, God is being. He is the interconnectivity between all of us. Yeah. So whether, you know, we have the word God because that's the only word we've come up with for it. Yeah. Yeah, we have a really limited lexicon of language when it comes to this stuff, and it's really frustrating. And this is what makes it so. Well, you instantly get put into a box, right? Yeah. Like, oh, okay, so you're like Joel Osteen.
Yeah,
It's like,
right. Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Yeah.
I don't believe in the same God Joel Osteen believes in,
Yeah, it's hard to, like I said, it's tricky. I'm
Yeah.
like trying to use words carefully,
Sure.
but I feel like I just have to say it how I feel.
Sure.
So yeah, that was a really huge moment for me. And past that, I tend to always have two sides to a psychedelic journey. Like
Okay.
there's always this really beautiful moment that takes place, and I think a lot of people have the same thing. And then you start to feel yourself getting pulled into this really dark place. Like, and it gets really scary. And I think that sort of interaction with that representation of Satan was that.
Yeah.
But from there, it kind of got even darker. Like I moved away from this river that I was sitting by, and I began to like purge physically, like vomiting essentially. And at the same time, like hundreds and hundreds of spiders are crawling all over me. And I was just, it was
Terrifying.
terrifying. You know, like you're being consumed by like.
Do you know if that was real or not, or?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if the spiders were real, but they were as real as they could ever be in the moment. And I wasn't scared of them. You know, a lot of being on psilocybin, like I think the psychedelic journey is, the process is, it's all about letting go, you know, and just knowing that when you're in those moments of fear that you're going to be okay. And I think as soon as you can do that, like you can manage whatever's going on,
Right.
you know? So those spiders weren't there to attack me. It was just like, it was as if I was a tree or a part of nature and they were just moving along their way, but they had just all like flocked to me. It's weird. And that, what I've sort of distilled from all of that was just this idea of living in my own filth. It was my, so I had found myself addicted to things again, not quite as bad as it had been in the past,
Sure.
but other substances and
Right.
other things that were numbing my.
These were at least legal substances.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
There wasn't any illegality to the,
Yeah, but nonetheless, it was
addiction.
It was still a means of me not dealing with my own shit. You know, it was an avoidant. I have an avoidant personality. That's how I deal with things by default.
Yeah.
So I have to be really aware of, because I'll trick myself. Like falling into delusion is so easy with anybody. Like we can convince ourselves that exercising is healthy and work is healthy and all these things, which is what I did. And they are healthy in and of themselves, but like only you know when what you're doing is a distraction versus what you're doing is good for you. You know, like, and I had sort of fallen into this, my avoidant tendencies with substances and some other things. And that was very clear to me. It was like, hey, like, you know, you've got to face these things. Like you got to get rid of them. Like it's going to suck, you know, and it's going to be tough, you know, but it's important in order for you to heal. Like you have to get rid of them. Like you're not allowing yourself to let all the pain in right now. Like you're like siphoning off parts of the pain so you don't have to face it. And that was just like so huge. Like, and it was like Ryan put it best, you know. He said that he's like, what did he say? I'm gonna butcher it, sorry, Ryan. He said that he's like, if I could tell you that I could give you a pill, and with that pill you could speak directly to God and he would speak back, would you take it? And I think that is essentially what psilocybin is for me anyway.
Yeah.
It opens up the doors to have a direct connection, or the most direct connection I've ever had to this idea of God. And it, you know, like when you pray, when I was younger, when I would pray, and you know, you had a lot of stigma around prayer and how all that worked. You prayed
Right.
before your meals and all these things. It's like, I never heard back from God. It was like,
Yeah.
you're just doing it because it's ritualistic, it's tradition, whatever. And I think a lot of people probably experience that, that are like living in that Christian world. And a lot of people probably have a lot of questions there, because I did, you know. That was a huge question for me. Like, why doesn't God speak back? Like, why don't I hear, I don't know.
Well, how many biblical stories does God actually speak back?
Yeah.
Audibly.
Yeah.
To these people.
Yeah. Usually only on very profound stories. And,
exactly.
I think about like the story of Abraham. Yeah. Was it Abraham?
Mm-hmm.
Going to the mountain.
You gotta give me more.
The 10 Commandments.
That's
Moses.
Moses.
Yeah, Moses.
Once you said Abraham,
I was
like my mind went blank. I'm like, which one? So Moses, yeah.
Yeah, I think about that story of Moses.
Yeah.
Like going up to the mountain, speaking to God, receiving the 10 Commandments, bringing it back down to the people. Like, that's psilocybin. Like, that's what happens. Like, you go meet with God in this unbelievably profound, terrifying way.
Right.
He delivers a message, and it's your choice as to whether you want to like be open enough to accept that or not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then you carry it back with you, and it makes so much sense, you know, when I start to think of and read these stories again. I'm like, oh shit. Like,
you have like this new paradigm and lens that you view these stories in.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild, man.
Yeah, it is.
Did you find anything, Kyle? What'd you find?
Found the guy who theorized the whole thing.
Okay. No. Just tell me what the guy's name is.
It's John M. Allegro,
Okay.
and he theorized that Christianity started as he called his book is The Sacred Mushroom.
Oh, okay.
Cross.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
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 Rogan's talked about him, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sacred mushroom and the cross.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's all theory, but there's... I have to check that one out.
Yeah.
As far as like these profound experiences within these trips, I know for a fact, like afterwards is a pretty hellish experience, like back to earth.
Yeah.
Like, what has been like the return to reality been like?
Well, I think back to a lot of like, it really starts, like it reframes, obviously, like from what I've been talking about, like it reframes a lot of these biblical ideals. And I keep thinking back to like this idea of fear and trembling in the presence of God. And I feel like I experience that in a very real way. It's so overwhelming, like entering into this space, like to be in that presence. You feel, I remember feeling so small and unworthy of being in that space. And that was like, that was part of like that weeping process. You're just like, I can't be here. Like, what am I doing here?
Right.
And you feel, I remember feeling like all my anger towards God prior, when I was angry, about feeling abandoned, felt so foolish. You're just like, oh my God, like I can't believe, like you don't even know what to do with it, and the presence is just so overwhelming.
Sure.
And it's like, yeah, of course, like you're gonna go live in the presence of God for 6-8 hours, and then out of nowhere, like you get slingshotted back to reality. It's like all of a sudden you're back in the midst of like normal life, business and the grind and the rat race and all of it, and the city and the tension and the anger and just the sickness that we have as a society, that and it becomes really apparent, and it's like I don't know what to do with it sometimes. Like, and I think I just I keep going back to like the things that I can control. It's like, okay, well, what can I control? Like, this is the world that I live in, and there's a lot of beauty to it, but it's also a difficult thing to manage. And so I kind of just dive into myself, like, okay, like I have to, despite, you know, being in this new paradigm of reality, you know, I know that there's a lot of things that kind of are living in the meta that you kind of have to grab at. Like as soon as you get out of that space, like your trip, it's all of those things are still there and resonating, but they're not understood like they were in that space.
It's kind of like waking up from a dream and like you understood it in the dream, but then trying to recall it. Yeah. Once you've launched back to reality.
Yes, exactly.
It's like very difficult too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're trying to capture. I can remember the visuals. I can remember like painting a picture, but it's like you're trying to capture that felt experience, because that's where all of the beauty is. It's like to feel that is it's all felt. I mean, it's seen as well, but yeah, you're trying to capture the essence of it all, and it's impossible. Like you can't, you know. So I feel like I'm scrambling to try to like get as much out of it as I can. Okay, like how can I distill as much of this as I possibly can? So you just a lot of writing and a lot of honesty, you know, with yourself. And like I said, like one of the big messages from this whole experience was me dealing with my own shit. So it forces me to go, okay, like I'm going to sit here every day and I'm going to write all of this out. You know, what does this look like for me to deal with my own shit? What is my shit? What are the things that I'm telling myself that are lies that I've convinced myself of? We all have them, all of us. And I think the more you refine it and the more you do deal with it, the harder it becomes to spot the new lies you tell yourself, because they're more innocent, you know, they're less obvious, and they sort of, they manifest themselves in these healthy ways. And, you know, one of my big ones that's been a really strange one for me is like, and we talked about this a little bit, it's like learning to play again. You know, like I've lost the ability to play, and that sounds so weird, but it goes back to that driven personality of mine. Like everything has been an agenda of, I'm going to go for a bike ride or whatever. I'm going to go for a run, but I have this goal and this goal and this goal. And then I'm going to work and I'm going to do this, and all of these external goals that come back. And it's like, when was the last time I just like fucked off, you know, did something because I wanted to, and I lost track of time and I just like had fun. And it's like, that's been a long time. And that's not good, you know. And it's like, that's not obvious either, you know, because you build the discipline in your life, you build the regiment, and then you get feedback from other people saying like, oh wow, like you've really cleaned your life up, like you're really doing, you work so hard. And it's like, that feels good. Okay, let's do more of that, you know. And it's like, but for me, I'm at this place where like I tip the scales too far, you know. It's like, I'm an all or nothing person. You are. And just trying to find balance again.
No, and we play pickleball once a week. And that's just us fucking around on a pickleball court, you know, just playing. You beat me every time though, so.
That's not true.
It is. But there's no agenda, and it's a beautiful thing. And that's one thing I get to experience even with just my girls. They have this, it's a cup that can never be filled. They always want to play. And I remember seeing something that it was like, you know, I'm tired when I get home. I'm ready to just veg out and not do anything. But that's like, they're coming to me like, Daddy's home, the big play toy's home. And all I want to do is lay down on the couch. And my little one, London, just comes up to me. He's like, Daddy, I want to play. Let me play. Let's play. And you just have to remind yourself, like, they're not going to ask for that forever. You know? And so just like being in that moment, being present, they just like, they don't even want to like play games. Like they just want to like wrestle on the ground or whatever. Like, you know, it's just, it is something to that, like just playing. And like, ever since you told me that, I'm like, okay, yeah. Cause like when you're trying to constantly be better, playing almost seems like a waste of time. Sleeping feels like a waste of time. Like, but everything has to have an agenda. Everything has to have a purpose. Like, I'm going to go out on a date with my wife because I know it's good for our relationship.
Right.
It's like, well, maybe I just go out on a date with my wife because I want to go out on a date with my wife and I want to have fun. Like, you know, not everything has to be like this purpose-driven, like agenda-filled, checking the box to kind of bring that back around of like, okay, you're doing the right thing.
No, absolutely, man. And that's, you know, that whole idea of, you know, going on a date with your wife, it's like, I always had that issue as well. Like, I would do the same thing, just there would be sort of an agenda there, but it's like you have all these restrictions. It's like, well, I'm only gonna have one drink because I know I have to get up early in the morning, and I have this and I have that and I have that. And it's like, no, like sometimes you just have to go out and have too many drinks and like not give a shit about it, you know, and just enjoy being present with the person that you share your life with, and like not thinking about when you have to be to bed, you know, like going to bed at 1 a.m. and just who cares? Like next day, like you make it up and it's fine. But and I think that was this thing that I got trapped in, was like wasting away the present for what could be in the future, which I think in a lot of ways is a beautiful thing. Like seeing yourself and others for who they could be. You know, I think there's this weird balance. It's like, and I sometimes forget to just love myself for who I am. You know, like you're always looking at the next potential version of you and trying to get there. And it's like, you lose a sense of presence.
I know I mean, it's true for me. I beat the shit out of myself in my head. Yeah. Like all of my insecurities, like all of my faults, they're just very present in my head. And I'm constantly like having to check myself on like, you got to be kinder to yourself. Like you are trying your best. Like you are working. Like, yes, you want to have that driven like voice in your head. Like you can do more, you can be better, you could do this, you could do that. But you also have to like take breaks and be kind to yourself as well. But I get it. I mean, like one of my favorite things about our relationship is that we, no matter what, we'll call each other and have this extremely long, introspective, deep conversation. And that's like one of my favorite things about our relationship is like, there's no shallow conversation with Morgan. You better buckle up. It's going to be an hour-long conversation, and we're going to range from everything from spirituality to, I don't know, just everything, all of it. But hey, man, I know you got to get out of here. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you, but I appreciate you coming on, man, and just being honest. And I love that about you.
Thanks, man. No, it was really nice to be back on here chatting with you, man.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
Love you.
Love you too, man.